My name's Heather. I use they, she pronouns, and I'm a bookseller and gift seller here at the Booksmith. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. If this is your first time here, welcome in. Some housekeeping before we begin. If you pre-ordered a book, it will be available for pickup at the back counter at the end of the event. If you'd like to purchase more or one that you haven't purchased already, you're welcome to do that back there as well. And just so you know, this event is being live streamed tonight on that iPad right there. We always try to position it so that there aren't any audience members in the live stream, but just so you know, it is right there, so if you walk in front of it, you will be in the live stream. Our moderator this evening is Maura Johnston. Maura has written about music and culture for more than 25 years, with pieces published in the Boston Globe, Entertainment Weekly, Time, and Rolling Stone. She has also served as the music editor at the Village Voice. She is an adjunct instructor at Boston College, where she teaches popular music writing, as well as a DJ on Uncertain.fm, and she lives in Alston. Thanks so much for bringing your expertise to make the event.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, our author this evening is Chris Molanphy. Chris is a chart analyst and pop critic who writes about the intersection of culture and commerce and popular music. For Slate, he created and hosts the Hit Parade podcast and writes their Why Is This Song Number One series. His work has also appeared in Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Vulture, NPR Music's The Record, The Village Voice, Billboard, and CMJ. Chris has also been a frequent guest on NPR's All Things Considered, on the media Planet Money and Soundcheck, on SiriusXM, and on numerous podcasts, including the Culture Gabfest, The Gist, and the New York Times podcast. Tonight we're here to discuss Chris's newest book, Old Town Road. In this most recent installment of Duke University Press's single series, Chris considers Lil Nas X's debut single as pop artifact, chart phenomenon, and cultural watershed. Old Town Road was more than a massive hit, with the most weeks at #1 in Billboard Hot 100 history. It was also a prism through which to track the evolution of popular music consumption and the way race influences how the music industry categorizes songs and artists. By both lionizing and satirizing genre tropes, it's a country song built from an alternative rock sample, a hip-hop song in which nobody raps, a comical song that transcends novelty, and a queer anthem. Lil Nas X troubles the very idea of genre. Ultimately, Molanphy shows how Old Town Road channeled decades of Americana to point the way towards our cultural future. I'm so excited to host this conversation tonight. Please join me in welcoming Maura Johnston and Chris Molanphy.
Hello? Yes. We're not on yet.
Are we on now?
We are on now. So Chris, I feel like our conversation is going to pretty much answer one question, which is, why was this song number one?
That is kind of my stock and trade, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's see. Streaming, TikTok, Zoomers, and just because it's a banger, I guess.
It's really good, yeah. No, it's a great song.
It's a legitimately good song. And, you know, I feel like I have to say that right out loud because I think sometimes I get skeptical questions like, well, wasn't this just a phenomenon of technology? Wasn't it just a phenomenon of TikTok? Wasn't it just kind of like a flash in the pan? And I'm like, no, actually it was kind of a sturdy song. And yes, Lil Nas X, Montero, Lamar Hill captured lightning in a bottle with this song, but it had craft behind it. And I want to credit it for, what it achieved in that regard.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so catchy. The hook is so simple, yet so, I like to use the term brain Velcro-y, because it just really sticks with you and you're just like, you're standing somewhere and you're like, take my horse to the old town, you're gonna sing it. But I do think that, we can sort of unpack each of those because as we were talking about backstage, the Hot 100 calls itself a music consumption chart, a singles consumption chart, a song consumption chart. But I also think that it is in a lot of ways a chronicle of how technology has shaped pop music over time.
Absolutely.
And do you want to speak to that a little bit, like in your observations, both about the song, but just like overall as a chart watcher for many years?
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing about the charts in earnest for about 15 years. I started doing it for Maura when we were both at Idolater back in the mid to late aughts. And back then, the download was king. And the download, the 99-cent download at iTunes was kind of its own specific thing. And it definitely increased the metabolism of the charts such that songs could rise and fall faster. But the difference between a download and a stream is that with a download, we know when you buy it, but we don't know how often you play it. So we have no idea if you play it once or you play it literally dozens of times. Streaming completely changes our understanding of hit making. It chronicles exactly how many times somebody hits play again and again and again. And I feel like Old Town Road probably would have been a hit in a download era, but it was really streaming that made it the mega hit that it was. The Hot 100, which of course has been around since the 1950s, it was started in 1958, has always measured at least two things: sales of songs, whatever format that was, whether that was 45 RPM vinyl, singles in the 80s, CD singles in the 90s, the download in the aughts. So sales of songs are still part of it, and radio airplay. And I like to say that these two data pools are kind of the yin and yang. They measure what I call active fandom and passive fandom. Active fandom is, the artist who releases a song. We had one just this week. Ariana Grande just debuted at #1 on the Hot 100 this week with a new song called Yes And the Ariana fans had to stream the bejesus out of it, buy the bejesus out of it right away. Whereas radio is a more passive medium. Radio is kind of what's in the ether, it's what's ambient. And it turns out that when Billboard came up with this formula in 1958, which they've tweaked a bajillion different ways, but is still fundamentally how the chart works, they came up with the secret sauce that measures this mix between active and passive fandom, where you're just hearing something in the background on the radio versus when you're actively saying, I want to own that. What streaming does to that formula, streaming adds a third leg to the stool. It adds a third component. And in a way, it's kind of, it's a mix of both. It is kind of both like airplay and like a sale, in the sense that you, the user, choose the song you want to play, but you don't keep it. So if you want to hear it again, you've got to play it again. So it's ambient like radio, but it's active like a sale. And that third factor has really revolutionized the way the charts work. When I was writing about the charts for you at Idolater and the Village Voice when we were together there, it was all about the download, and it was about what could pop and what could sell. If a Britney song dropped and sold 300,000 or 400,000 copies in a week, that would go to #1. But now it's all about what gets consumed the most, to use that word that you used before. And Old Town Road just kind of caught people at a moment when consumption was rising and taking over the charts. And one more point, you talked about how catchy the song is, how brain sticky it is. Lil Nas X designed the song to be brain sticky. He intentionally made it funny. He's not offended when you call it a novelty record, because he wanted that song to be funny. He has said in multiple interviews, I knew when people heard that line, I got the horses in the back. That would be funny, that would turn into a meme. That was exactly what he was designing the song for. And so it's a song sort of custom built to go viral, custom built to be streamed and shared socially, not just purchased. So I think that's why it was a #1 hit.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering also, novelty songs obviously have been around in different guises for so long, but do they commonly go to #1? Because I can't really think of many
Not
that
really.
have.
I did an episode of Hit Parade a couple years ago about the history of the novelty hit, and there was kind of a heyday of the novelty hit that lasted from about the late 50s till about the mid 70s. So everything from, Alvin and the Chipmunks, or, the Witch Doctor in the 50s, or, certain 60s records like the Monster Mash, or in the 70s you had records like The Streak by Ray Stevens. It was possible for a novelty record to kind of capture the hit parade. But what started to happen in the 80s was that radio stations, when radio got really professionalized in the way that it does now, and demographically targeted, there was no upside to putting, say, a Weird Al hit, as big as Weird Al is. We all know Weird Al, we all love Weird Al. But Weird Al has never had a #1 Hot 100 hit. The best he ever did was with White and Nerdy in the mid-2000s, and that was mostly because of downloads. Because a radio station is probably, even though we love Weird Al, is not going to put a Weird Al hit in regular rotation, the way they would maybe in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. So yeah, Old Town Road kind of did something unusual if you consider it a novelty hit.
Right. But it is funny because you mentioned in the book not to spoil everything, but you do mention how it popped onto the country airplay chart because of morning radio airplay.
Right.
Which is kind of an interesting quirk.
Yes. Well, and that was kind of the most airplay it got at country radio. So of course, one of the controversial aspects of the song, one of the reasons I wanted to write about it for this series, is it was a source of much controversy over whether it was a country song. And infamously, it was on Billboard's Hot Country Songs chart for 1 week at number 19. And then 1 week later, Billboard woke up and said, wait a minute, and they pulled it from the country chart. And I go into, in great detail, the methodology backstory of how the genre charts work at Billboard that kind of forced Billboard's hand. They were not innocent bystanders in this decision. They had two bad choices, and they picked the choice that frankly almost looked worse, pulling it from the chart. But then, in terms of country radio airplay, most of the country radio airplay was mostly like curiosity airplay, like on the Bobby Bones Show, which is a famous country morning show.
That's syndicated.
That's syndicated,
right? Yeah.
and that generated most of the airplay that it got on country radio. Most country radio stations were not playing it back to back with Luke Bryan and Morgan Wallen and the like. It never really entered regular rotation on country radio.
I think country radio is such an interesting phenomenon because it's obviously a format that has stuck around even with the sort of encroachment of the formats that are rooted in the past.
Yes.
But I also feel like, and especially since Old Town Road, it's really kind of, sorry to use this phrase about country music, but circled its wagons around kind of like the I know, totally unintentional, but it's sort of, it's really kind of like doubled down on like being like mostly dudes who play this kind of one type of country, where you have like artists like Kane Brown who would like work with Marshmello as a way to go on the pop charts, and who had that song Thank God with his wife that crossed over to the pop charts. Or you have artists like Zach Bryan, who I think put out one of the best records of last year, and who had a #1 song because of streams, which was I Remember Everything, his duet with Casey Musgraves, another artist who is sort of not really appreciated by country radio programmers.
Right, and I mean, in the world of country, radio still rules the roost more than it does arguably in any other genre. And, this is why, to pick another artist, it's why Taylor Swift, among many reasons, why she evolved out of country, because she had, glad-handed every country radio programmer, and she kind of couldn't satisfy their needs forever. Never mind the fact that when she evolved away from country music, country was in the bro country era, and they weren't terribly interested in country songs by women, even one as popular as Taylor Swift. Yeah, country radio is a very specific, almost demi-genre of its own that adheres to a certain traditional value or traditional sound, even though what's so remarkable about country music, especially in the last 5 years, especially in what I'll call the Morgan Wallen era, country has adopted tropes from hip-hop. They've adopted trap drums. They've adopted instrumentation that is endemic to, pop and hip-hop formats. But because it's sung by a white guy with a twang, it is considered acceptable for country radio. And one of the things I chronicle in this book is I go back virtually 100 years. I mean, country music is basically a 100-year-old genre at this point. It's been around since the 1920s. And talk about how black music has been baked into country music from the start. And whether it's the banjo, which is essentially an African-derived instrument, or various song pickers who trained the likes of Hank Williams and the Carter family way back in the day. They were basically getting their song ideas from black performers and black songwriters, black players. Country music has been at the root black music has been at the root of country music since the start.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting just how Lil Nas X also kind of opened the door for like Blanco Brown to be considered country, which I think Get Up is a great song that's super catchy.
I love it.
But at the same time, you have this kind of, again, like just doubling down of very kind of loose genre ideas, because Morgan Wallen sampled Rich Gang on his most recent album, right? And at the same time, he's the standard bearer for this current country movement.
Right.
I also think that your history of radio is really interesting, and just the way in which you talk about the formatting and everything. And I guess I wanted to see, how, with the rise of streaming and with the rise of sort of more chaotic movement from the ground up as opposed to the top down aspect of radio, how is radio responding to that, and how has the Hot 100 changed and not changed since Lil Nas X had this incredible 19-week run at the top?
I mean, radio is playing catch up, basically.
Yeah.
Radio programmers will admit that they're keeping one eye on TikTok and trying to figure out if something breaks on TikTok, okay, is it breaking because this one little piece of a song is ideal for, micro videos? Or does the song work in toto? So, for example, you have a song like Sure Thing by Miguel, an artist I know you and I both love, which was a massive R&B hit about 12, 13 years ago, but didn't really cross to the pop charts. Suddenly it takes off on TikTok. It takes off in sped up form, because that's another thing that's happening on TikTok. And then suddenly radio programmers are like, oh, this entire Miguel record at normal speed is a terrific record. We should be playing this. And Sure Thing went to #1 at pop radio. Like, it went back on the charts. It almost cracked the Hot 100's top 10. I think it peaked at number 11. And at pop radio, it actually went all the way to #1, which is remarkable. So TikTok is making hits in a way it wasn't 5 years ago when Old Town Road took off the way it did. Old Town Road is kind of the BC-AD moment of social movements. It wasn't as if there was nothing prior to that. You had everything from Harlem Shake in 2013 to This Is America by Childish Gambino in 2018. It wasn't as if social had nothing whatsoever to do with hit making, but you can really point to a trend shift when Lil Nas X has his moment in 2019, and suddenly radio programmers are like, oh, we have to take this seriously. I even quote a radio programmer in the book who admits, he was talking to, I think, either Rolling Stone or Billboard. He said, we thought it was going to be a little fad and we were playing it for a bit, and then he got pulled from the country chart, everybody was talking about it, and now we're playing it 75 times a week.
Wow.
So that's a before and after moment.
Yeah. Well, also, one reason that I feel like Old Town Road stuck around too was Lil Nas X was very savvy about sustaining the life of the song.
Yes.
Through collaborations with forays into different genres. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, the ultimate one, and now it's considered the flagship version of the song, is the version with Billy Ray Cyrus. The original version of Old Town Road, and here's an interesting quirk. When it went to #1 in April of 2019, its first week at #1 was credited on Billboard's Hot 100 as just Lil Nas X. That was the version by himself that got to #1 on its own. So it didn't need Billy Ray Cyrus to get to #1, but arguably what kept it at #1 was the Billy Ray remix really supersized the song. It turned it from a 1-minute 53-second song to a 2-minute 38-second song, so it grew by about 30 to 40 seconds. Took on the length of something approaching a normal single. Frankly, Billy Ray's verse, hat down, cross town, living like a rock star, is my favorite part of the song. It's fantastic. Billy Ray is such an interesting figure to be joining Lil Nas X on this record because he is not at the cutting edge of country in 2019. And I love telling this story. The only reason that Lil Nas X asked Billy Ray Cyrus to be on his record was because when he was a tween or a kid watching Hannah Montana in the aughts, Billy Ray Cyrus, the father of Miley Cyrus, was the only country star he knew. And so in the closing days of 2018, when he's releasing Old Town Road by himself with no record label, he tweets out into the universe, somebody get me Billy Ray Cyrus on this. Now, if you're paying attention to country music in December 2018, you're going to say, somebody get me, Kenny Chesney on this. Or you're not going to ask for Billy Ray Cyrus. Billy Ray has not had a hit in about 15 to 20 years. And Billy Ray, to his credit, takes one listen to this record. Lil Nas X signs to Columbia Records around March of 2019. Columbia reps reach out to him. They say, this kid kind of wants you on his record. You might want to give it a listen. And he said, damn, that's original. I would be happy to do that. And part of Billy Ray's motivation for doing that was because he remembered, of course, his most famous hit is Achy Breaky Heart, which was considered a novelty record in 1992 when it went to #1 on the country charts, top 5 on the pop charts, and made his album Some Gave All sell 9 million copies. he remembered that he was kind of looked down upon by the Nashville establishment in 1992, like, well, you've got a hit right now, but this is a fad, and it's all about the line dance. In other words, it was about the video, way back in 1992. It was about the video playing on CMT, more than it was about the song, and he knew what it was like to be denigrated and disrespected, and he's like, yeah, all right, you want to stick poke a finger in the eye of Nashville? I'll get on your record with you. And that, led to another round of press coverage, like, okay, we've put a white country singer with a cowboy hat on this record. Is it now country enough for you? Will Billboard put it back on the charts? And spoiler alert, Billboard did not put it back on the country charts. I think because they realized that they put it back on the country charts, it would have been calling their bluff on, no, it's not about the race of the artist, it's about the sound of the record. So it never went back on the hot country songs chart. But and then, like you say, he kept it alive for months afterward. He did, remixes with everybody from Diplo to Young Thug, whom he credited with creating the whole country trap genre with his Beautiful Thugger Girls album. He had on the Yodeling Kid, Mason Ramsey, who had a verse that he threw in about hopping up on his Razor scooter rather than his horse. Good fan service, because as I point out in the book, tweens and kids love this song. So yeah, he even, the last remix that came out just before it fell out of #1 was from a member of BTS that he titled Soul Town Road, SEOUL Town Road, and it featured a rap from a member of BTS. So Lil Nas X was kind of super serving every market with those remixes.
Yeah, and his knowledge of like how to sort of keep the online fans happy, he had sort of honed as a member of one of the most notorious groups of online fans, the Barbs.
Right.
The Nicki Minaj days.
Right. Let us not forget that is how Lil Nas X made his bones.
Yeah.
He was a Barb. He was a Nicki stan. That was how he learned how to tweet deck, how to tweet his obsession. At one point, he was slapped on the wrist by Twitter for his Nas Mirage Twitter handle, and so he just changed one letter and created a new Twitter account and kept tweeting. So he sort of figured out the folk ways of the social internet long before not long before, but let's say a year or two before he actually started recording his own music. He put out his early tracks on SoundCloud, so he kind of mastered the sound of SoundCloud rap. So by the time TikTok shows up, and TikTok, remember when Lil Nas X records this song in October of 2018, TikTok itself has only been in America less than a year, and it hasn't created a big hit yet. It's getting buzzy. Month after month, it's the most downloaded app on the Apple App Store, but it hasn't made a hit yet. And in a way, Old Town Road is kind of the proof of concept of TikTok. It shows everybody what TikTok can do.
Do you think that the Musical.ly purchase was what really like established TikTok in the
Absolutely.
in the space? Because it's so funny, because I remember in like the mid 2010s going to if any of you remember the Digitour, you might not, it's not very big, but that was where I first saw Rebecca Black live. If any of you remember Friday by Rebecca Black, and they would have like Musical.ly stars on their bill,
Right.
because they were really trying to be a kind of music forward social video site.
Right, and it made that technology of making it easy for you to lip sync along with a song and embed a piece of music in a video ridiculously easy. And so when the Chinese company that owns TikTok acquired Musical.ly, they fused it with the nascent Chinese version of TikTok and released it in America. And so music was sort of baked into the DNA of TikTok from the start. They were making it absurdly easy to bake music into your videos right from the jump.
Yeah. Lil Nas X also represents something that is unfortunately rare on the pop charts, which is LGBTQ representation.
Yes.
When we worked together in the late 2000s, we talked about this in relation to Adam Lambert, the American Idol runner-up, who came in second on American Idol but got the cover of Rolling Stone anyway because he was he was very charming.
They weren't going to give it to Chris Allen.
They were not going to give it to Chris Allen, and he's the frontman of Queen now, so
right.
He won. But I wanted to talk about kind of how Lil Nas X established more of an LGBTQ presence at the top of the charts.
Well, and he did it by coming out of the closet while he had the #1 song in America. That is quite literally unprecedented. There are already precious few #1 songs in Hot 100 history, dating all the way back to the 50s, by out LGBTQ artists. There are certainly been some by artists who later came out, like Freddie Mercury of Queen, for example, but there are very few Hot 100 #1s by out gay artists. And, you know, Montero was weighing whether to come out at all. He literally came out in the final hours of June 30th, 2019, because I think he knew what he was risking. His song at that point had been #1 for about, I think it was 13 weeks at that point. And to come out the way he did was very brave. He had been watching other artists like Frank Ocean, who had kind of made a half step out of the closet a few years back. And it didn't seem to harm his career. If anything, it kind of rallied some people to his cause. And he was particularly concerned about the reaction in the hip hop community. You know, that had been something that had worried Montero. And he finally, you know, he observed what Frank did, and he thought about other artists like Troye Sivan and, you know, artists who had stepped out of the closet and not been punished for it, and he felt brave enough to do it. And what I love about Lil Nas X is that when he came out, he came all the way out. I mean, he really is the least shy artist ever. You know, his next #1 hit 2 years later in 2021 was Montero, Call Me By Your Name, which I wrote about for Why Is This Song #1 in Slate, and I dubbed it right in the headline, the gayest #1 song of that time. And I don't think I was exaggerating when I said that. So.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, he also just set such a precedent by being so himself, too,
Yes.
in a time when, you know, we're both music journalists, we know how it's like, a tippy top artist, like you'll get 15 minutes maybe with them, and their images are very controlled and very kind of like managed, and he was very antithetical to that. Do you think that had an effect down the line on how other artists behaved?
I think so. I mean, he has shown what can be done in the sort of post-social, post-TikTok world. You know, I think he realized that being himself, being, if you will, kind of the most extreme, and I mean that in the best sense, version of himself had worked for him. And so why not be fully himself? Why not bring his whole self to his career? And I think it has set a very positive example. You've seen, you know, more artists come out as non-binary, bi, in the wake of Lil Nas X's revelation. And, you know, I mean, look at what's happening to Renee Rapp right now, and she's come out as bisexual, for example. So, you know, it doesn't seem to be a demerit in the world of pop the way it was before.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, too, you know, I feel like he is also somebody who is just so himself in his music, where, like, you know, the Old Town Road was like this kind of hybrid, right? Like the beat is a Trent Reznor beat,
Yes.
you know, that was manipulated by somebody else, and it's a country song, and it has all these sort of amalgams to it. And then, you know, like, a lot of my students will ask me about AI music, and I'm like, imagine if you trained an AI model on Lil Nas X, but only on Old Town Road. Would you ever get Call Me By Your Name, or, you know, any of them,
Industry
even
Baby.
Panini, you know, like,
Right.
which is, you know, definitely closer. So I wonder, you know, how he kind of reflects. I tend to see this, it's not an antagonism, it's just sort of a, you know, whatever about, whatever attitude toward being in a genre. And I'm wondering how he reflects that and also pushes that idea forward.
I mean, I've said that Lil Nas X is the ultimate Zoomer artist, the ultimate Gen Z artist, in the sense that he troubles the very idea of genre. Genre is kind of immaterial to him, you know, and so the whole question, you know, the reason we got into this contretemps in 2019 over what chart the song was supposed to be on was that when Lil Nas X posted it to Spotify, he just tagged it all this stuff. He tagged it pop, he tagged it hip hop, he tagged it R&B, and he tagged it country. And that was why, when it started blowing up the way it did, it was allowed for 1 week onto Billboard's Hot Country Songs chart, because nobody was kind of minding the store. And when it got on the country chart, that's when folks in, you know, the Nashville Industrial Complex complained. But there's something very kind of old school about these genre definitions. And you know, it's funny, when I wrote this book, I felt like I had to take a position on the usefulness of genre, because there are many of the think pieces that came out in the wake of Old Town Road and the blow up of the country chart were calling for the elimination of genre. And I don't go quite that far, because I sort of feel like if you told an R&B fan tomorrow, hey, there's no more genre, you're not gonna have R&B radio anymore, they would go, don't take that away from me. If you said that to a country fan, certainly they'd say, no, you're not. You know, so the audience wants genre, but my argument is that the audience needs to define what a genre is, not the top-down, you know, industrial complex dictating this song is country, this song is R&B. That's where you get into trouble, because you're then making often essentialist race-based arguments over what belongs in each box. Whereas the audience is more ecumenical and wide-ranging in its tastes than the programmers often give them credit for.
Totally, I completely agree with you on that point. You've been observing the charts for many decades. I remember illustrating one of your Idolater posts with a great picture of Casey Kasem in one of his signature sweaters, and you've been writing about it for, 17 years now? Because you started in like 2007 with me, I think?
That is right.
So, what does you've been watching the charts so closely, what does Lil Nas X reflect as far as the sort of evolution that you've seen, and what could he reflect in the years to come?
That's an interesting question. I mean, to me, he's the apotheosis. The reason I wanted to write this book is because, you know, when Duke University Press approached me and they actually proposed it to me, it wasn't my idea. I realized that it was a prism to talk about the history of the charts as much as the history of this song, and I do both in the book. And it's kind of the culmination of things that have been building, this kind of breaking apart of assumptions we had about how songs chart and how songs become popular for years. And, you know, the organic way that it kind of blew up, and the way that it, you know, summarizes, to use your phrase, the bottom-up, you know, popularity rather than the top-down popularity. I think it's a signal example of that. It's not the only example, but it's kind of the ultimate example. The fact that it spent 19 weeks at #1 on the Hot 100, longer than any song has. And by the way, we had a scare last year because Morgan Wallen spent 16 weeks at #1 with Last Night, but he didn't quite beat it, thank heaven. I would have been depressed if I had published this book and Morgan Wallen had beaten that record, but thank heaven that didn't happen. You know, it really does represent kind of the new order. And, you know, some of what you've seen just in those 5 years, like, you know, within the first year you had a song by Roddy Ricch called The Box, which blew up because of TikTok. And it was something like the 4th single it wasn't even really a single. Like, they had put out glossy videos for previous tracks on that album, and it was this song with a squeaky noise that people were putting in their videos that then blew up and became an 11-week #1. You know, we've had, you know, songs like that topping the charts, or, you know, even, dare I say it, what happened to Oliver Anthony last summer. You know, as crazy as that whole phenomenon was, I feel like that Oliver Anthony single, the way that blew up from absolutely nowhere, that exists in a post-Lil Nas X world, whatever you think of it, good, bad, or indifferent. We're already kind of living in a world that Lil Nas X helped create.
How do you feel about the way that we talked about Sure Thing earlier, but how do you what about the way that certain catalog songs, you know, I'm thinking of, even with Ghosts, Mariana Cross, making the Hot 100 at all, but Kate Bush is a really great example of this too.
Sure.
With Running Up That Hill. And, you know, it was funny because I when I want to decompress, I listen to the Classic American Top 40 station on iHeart, which totally recommend. 70s and 80s countdown, just 70s, 80s, 70s, 80s. It's great. Brings you back. And also to play times before I was born. But there was a countdown that I heard recently that had one of the countdowns that had Running Up That Hill on it at number 35 or whatever.
Right.
But how do you feel? What do you think? Do you foresee more of these older songs sort of catching fire, or do you think that there are going to be fail-safes or sort of stops put in to kind of prevent that kind of thing?
I mean, the former, and it's not just going to be older songs, it's going to be Christmas songs, it's going to be Disney songs. I mean, so much of what we've seen in the last 5 years, everything from We Don't Talk About Bruno to Running Up That Hill to Mariah getting her, Christmas #1, that happened later in the same year that Lil Nas X happened. Basically, it's all about streaming and about how we now have better and deeper data on what people exactly play. Not just what they're willing to buy, not just what a radio programmer is willing to program, but what people actually hit play on. and it is hugely revealing. We've never seen a Disney ensemble song go to #1 until We Don't Talk About Bruno. Who knows, if we'd had this technology, Be Our Guest from Beauty and the Beast, or Cinderella from the 50s would have gone to #1 if we'd had that kind of data back then, and we just didn't. So you're going to see older songs go to #1. You're going to see more Christmas songs go to #1. Brenda Lee just pulled off the Mariah Coup a month ago. That was a delightful thing that happened on the charts. You're going to see more of this randomness, and what's kind of fun about it, and I almost have a little sympathy for my friends in the recording industry. They kind of can't co-opt it, I don't think anybody's heart here is bleeding for them, but they've tried to kind of make fetch happen on TikTok, and if they can't blow the flame and force something to go viral, it really rarely works, and that's kind of delightful.
Yeah, I'm glad that Sophie Ellis-Bextor is finally getting her due
I know.
in the U.S. That's really delightful.
That song's the bomb.
It's so good. And Greg Alexander.
Right. Greg
He's
Alexander.
the guy. He knows how to write it.
Should I read?
Yeah, if you want. Yeah. What do you want? Let's have Chris read, and then we can take questions. I could talk to Chris for hours about this stuff.
Maura and I do in fact talk about what you're listening to right now is what Maura and I talk about.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right. So what I've been reading for these readings is the introduction to the book. Little pieces of this will sound familiar based on the intro that the folks at Brookline Booksmith did for me, but it seems to capture the theme of the book and why I wrote it. So here goes nothing. The last day of the school year at Lander Elementary in Mayfield Heights, Ohio, was Wednesday, May 29th, 2019. 5 days earlier, the fifth graders had taken part in the school's annual talent show, capping off the day with a school-wide performance of the #1 song in America. When video of that adorable performance got back to the artist behind the original song, he decided to visit Mayfield Heights and surprise the kids just before summer with an in-person performance of his hit live in their gymnasium. The performer, a Southern black 20-year-old born Montero Lamar Hill, arrived in his now standard uniform of cowboy hat, boots, and fringe jacket. Hill adjusted his outfit and was escorted by the school principal into the gym. And the kids lost their damn minds. As the young man who had dubbed himself Lil Nas X began singing Old Town Road on the gym's makeshift stage, the Lander Elementary kids practically screamed the lyrics back at him, including the titter-worthy line about bull riding and boobies. Minutes before stepping out on stage to this frenzied reception, the 20-year-old told the camera, quote, "I'm finna do the biggest show of my life." He was only half kidding. As recently as 4 months earlier, Hill hadn't even been signed to a recording contract. Rapid rises to fame were becoming more commonplace in the post-YouTube, post-Spotify, early TikTok era of internet-fueled music virality. But even by those standards, Hill's trajectory seemed meteoric. As the young man himself told Rolling Stone just 1 month before his Lander Elementary performance, quote, "Time's been going pretty fast." Old Town Road was a singular phenomenon, a one of one. New York Times journalist Jasmine Hughes aptly calls it, quote, "an international anthem of defiance, tenacity, and travel plans," unquote. Few songs have experienced its rapid and broad cultural penetration. Within months of its creation, it connected with grade schoolers and grandparents, blue staters and red staters, the very online and the defiantly analog. It was heard in more than 40 countries around the world. It was consumed by millions of fans of pop, R&B, rap, dance, rock, and, yes, also country music. Some driven merely by curiosity, most because it's just a very catchy song. In at least one key statistical sense, no song has done what Old Town Road did. As of this writing, it remains the longest-lasting #1 hit of all time on America's flagship pop chart, the Billboard Hot 100. Its 19 weeks at #1 was more than twice as long as the Beatles' biggest hit and more than the biggest hits by Michael Jackson and Madonna combined. And consider, these superstars' historic #1s, which were respectively Hey Jude, 9 weeks at #1 in 1968, Billie Jean, 7 weeks in 1983, and Take a Bow, 7 weeks in 1995, were deployed years into each hitmaker's career. Old Town Road was Lil Nas X's first ever charting single. Chart historians, like the author of this book, make hay out of comparisons like these with the tacit understanding that the music business of 1968 and that of 2019 were very different. While the Hot 100's underlying formula has remained broadly the same over its 65 years of existence, the chart behaves very differently today than it once did. So yes, explaining how Lil Nas X pulled off his historic chart feat with Old Town Road means dissecting the chart as much as dissecting the song. Not unlike the home run record of Babe Ruth's day versus Barry Bonds's, we must reckon with the rules of the sport and the performance enhancers that warp those rules as we weigh the players' feats. Nonetheless, Old Town Road earned its climactic chart record. The song is an apotheosis, the culmination of a series of populist trends that had been building toward Lil Nas X's moment, trends in genre, in technology, in consumption, in identity. On his signature hit, Lil Nas X, whom I'll often reference as Nas, his preferred nickname, simultaneously lionized and satirized genre tropes. In so doing, he troubled the very idea of genre, whether it is necessary or even relevant. Nas's smash is a country song built out of an alternative rock sample, a hip-hop song in which nobody really raps, a comical song that somehow transcends novelty. It achieved all of this organically, using profoundly inorganic technologies. To the then 20-year-old Hills generation, these technologies have become so commonplace, they are now the lingua franca of musical creation. It took advantage of changes in our pop metabolism, how memes form movements, a virality that is now reified by the hit parade. Old Town Road even qualifies as a queer anthem, and not only because Montero Hill picked Pride Month 2019 right in the middle of his epic chart-topping run to come out of the closet. In sum, Old Town Road summarizes the musical past while pointing the way toward our cultural future. But, you may be asking, is it a great song? I'd argue that Old Town Road is an excellent pop song, sturdy, witty, inspired. But it's an even more amazing pop artifact. While listening to it, you can't help but think about its backstory, even if it's your first time hearing it. This only enhances its charms. Many great songs in pop history, at their core, revel in their own existence, from Like a Rolling Stone and Stayin' Alive to Smells Like Teen Spirit and Get Your Freak On. They are, at a root level, about themselves. The self-consciousness of Old Town Road is one of many things that makes it great. Charts, too, are reflexive and self-reinforcing. They are feedback loops that reflect popularity back at an industry eager to make things more popular, to turn once cool things into commonplace things that are then replaced by the next cool thing. What makes charts exciting, the reason I focus on them in my writing, my podcast, and my scholarship, is that the industry rarely knows with any certainty what cool is. Truly unique songs are pop moments that reset our understanding of where cool lies. Old Town Road was one of those, a pop moment that channeled decades of Americana and the bleeding edge of cool, all of which led up to those kids screaming at Lil Nas X about bull riding and boobies in the Lander Elementary gym.
Do you want to take questions?
Happy to.
Yeah, let's take some questions. Anybody just raise your hand and I'm a teacher, so I can do the call on thing. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier how streaming obviously has a huge impact on the charts. You've seen that with weird records being set, Taylor Swift taking over the whole top 10,
Yep.
Christmas songs coming back, all that kind of stuff. And on long drives, when my obsessive brain starts thinking about charts from the 80s and charts from the 90s, I wonder how knowing about consumption would have changed some of the records that were set back in the day. Like, Will I Was Always Love You been #1 for 15 weeks? Because people weren't going to listen to that over and over and over again. That would be exhausting.
Right. I think there's a good chance I Will Always Love You still would have been #1 for that long, but you're asking a fundamentally correct question in the sense that we can't know exactly what the patterns were like. I got into a very gentle and friendly debate with somebody on social media about a year ago who was talking about a certain chart record, and he said, in the Beatles' day, they would have had 50 #1 hits. And I said to him, they would have had more #1 hits, but they wouldn't have had 50. There aren't that many weeks in a year. That just fundamentally wouldn't happen. But he is right that in the Beatles' day, for starters, the very idea that you have to release a song as a single, and only singles were allowed on the Hot 100, only something released as a 45 RPM single in a retail store. The idea that anything could become a single. The idea that on Sgt. Pepper no singles were released, but for all we know, Lovely Rita or with a little help from my friends, would have been a top 40 radio record. We'll never know those kinds of things. I also often have to compare chart records from the heyday of the charts, or the old days of the charts, with what's happening, what the kinds of feats that Drake and Taylor Swift are pulling off now. And in a piece I did when Drake got 9 out of the top 10, the year before Taylor got 10 out of the top 10, I pointed out that, okay, what Drake just did is kind of fluky and it's based on streaming. However, what the Beatles pulled off in the spring of 1964, one of the most famous chart feats ever, when they locked down the entire top 5 of the Hot 100, that was kind of fluky too. It was because of some weird patterns that had to do with Capitol Records not jumping on the Beatles early enough, not releasing enough of their singles. Brian Epstein, their manager, sold off records like She Loves You and Twist and Shout to other smaller indie labels, so that when Beatlemania broke at the beginning of 1964, suddenly the market was flooded with Beatles product. Otherwise, if Capitol had been on their game, they would have released only one single at a time. So there are always asterisks and flukes on chart records, and it's just a matter of kind of understanding, to Maura's point, the technologies that are available and the rules that are, inherent at the time.
Yeah, I mean, if I could.
Please.
Like, I think about your point too when you'll hear certain songs like Walking on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves is such a good point. It's such a good example of this, because it's like, that song did not peak very high, but
Maybe
it
top
had,
10, but
it did go to number 1, but like, it had such a long tail compared to like
Yes.
other songs that went to number 1 or even number 5 in its day. And so that, I think, would have also been changed by a consumption-forward chart.
Plus, there are hits that, find their audience later. I did a whole episode of Hit Parade on something I call a legacy hit. One of the great examples is Elton John's Tiny Dancer. Peaked at number 41 in 1972. Was not even counted down by Casey Kasem. And now, if I asked you what are the big Elton John songs, you'd probably name that 3rd or 4th, after Benny and the Jets or something. So, sometimes songs have a way of finding their own pattern.
Any other questions? Oh, hello.
How do you feel about the same small collection of Christmas chestnuts taking over the charts every December? Does it feel unfair that seasonal songs would dominate non-seasonal songs, or is it a case of Billboard makes up the rules and changes them all the time so it doesn't really matter?
What Billboard is doing there, I mean, do I get a little bored every year seeing the same 5 records commanding the top 5? Basically, it's always Mariah, Brenda, Jingle Bell Rock by Bobby Helms, It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year by Andy Williams, and Holly Jolly Christmas by Burl Ives. Those 5 records dominated every year. And then Last Christmas by Wham started to sneak in, and I think it got as high as number 4. It bores me every year. I wish there were more of a shakeup. But on the other hand, what Billboard is doing is actually they have better data than they did before. One of the points I often make about the Billboard charts and how they've evolved is, let's pretend, and you can snicker and chuckle all you want when I say what I'm about to say, let's pretend that the music industry is not corrupt at all. Right? Because if the music industry has proven one thing, it's that if they can game the charts, they will. They always have, they've always tried, they always will try. And don't hate the player, hate the game. Even in the instance that the charts, if they were pure as the driven snow and there were no such thing as payola, we didn't have the technology, as far back as the 70s and the 80s to do better. So for example, before SoundScan, which is something I wrote about for Maura many times, SoundScan is that technology, I talk about it in the book, that showed up on the charts in 1991. Basically, it's just the barcode scanner. It seemed cutting edge at the time. It had been in supermarkets for about 5 or 6 years, but when it got to record stores, suddenly it turned out beep, beep, beep. Every time you were counting a sale, you were getting more accurate data on the charts than we'd ever had before. That was revolutionary because now we knew exactly to the piece count per store how many sales something was selling. Prior to SoundScan, it wasn't just that we didn't have that data, we didn't even really know the magnitude of a hit. So for example, a record I like to point to, in 1989, Tone Lop's Wild Thing peaked at number 2. That record got robbed. That record should have been a number 1 hit for at least a month or 2. The reason it got robbed is there's elements of racism in it. Many radio programmers were not willing to talk about how much they were playing this ribald song by a black rapper. Yes, some of that. But also, Billboard's chart formula, because they didn't know, reportedly at the time, Billboard said, it is our estimation that this record is selling about 3 to 4 more times than the rest of the Hot 100 combined. It was selling a ridiculous number of singles. Their formula couldn't take that into account. They didn't have any magnitude of a hit. Ergo, when you averaged out Tone Loc's Wild Thing being the best-selling song with it making maybe number 5 in radio airplay, it peaked at number 2. That should have been a number 1 record. Some of that's corruption, a little of that is corruption, a lot of it is just bad data. To get back to your Christmas point, what we're finding out with Christmas music was always a tough fit for the charts because it's this unusual brand of music. We play the bejesus out of it for about 6 weeks a year, and then come December 27th, 28th, we're like, ugh, I never want to hear Mariah Carey again. And then, of course, come November 20th, we're going to be playing it again. It turned out that that short window was a bad fit for the analog era of the charts, and even the early digital era, because if all you're doing is counting individual sales of a song, we know that a number of people have bought Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You as a download, but we don't know how many times they're playing it. Christmas music, in a world where you have streaming data, suddenly it makes a difference how many times people are playing it, and for those 4 to 6 weeks, we're playing the hell out of Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree and All I Want for Christmas Is You, and suddenly we can accurately track how well these records should have been charting all along. So I almost see what's happening in the Christmas charts now as an amendment to something that probably should have been happening all along. Is it a little boring? Yeah, I'll admit that. I wrote an article for Vulture last year where I talked about the Christmas canon and how glacial the change is, because you can actually see, you pointed out Last Christmas. Last Christmas is gradually inching up. I predict that within 5 years, Last Christmas may go to number 2 or number 1, and I will be delighted because that's a phenomenal song. But it's going to take several Christmases before it happened, because it's a Sisyphean exercise. Every year, it gets about 4 or 5 weeks to climb the charts, and then bada boom, it falls off. So it'll be interesting to watch that.
Any other questions?
Do you think that Old Town Road can be overtaken at any point? Or
Sure.
are we going to have to wait for another technological shift? You know, kind of as you mentioned, that that's what it took for it to go number 1.
That's a really good question. And I'm not sure if it will be a technological shift. I mean, I got a legitimate scare out of what Morgan Wallen was doing last year. And that was kind of good old-fashioned streaming. Like, by old-fashioned, I mean, like, it was not, he wasn't blowing up on TikTok per se. It was just that Morgan Wallen is sort of the first country artist that streams in the volume that a rapper does. That's kind of the fandom that he is attracted. To a certain extent, Zach Bryan has that fandom, but it's of a different character. Morgan Wallen fans, it's kind of like they just stream the hell out of that album each and every day. And it is possible that another record could outlast Old Town Road, even without a technological shift. But I do think that, you know, whatever the successor to TikTok is, that's likelier to have, you know, that kind of impact. You know, one other weird factor, since we talked about radio before, radio airplay has really taken it on the chin in the last 10 years. I mean, the death of radio has been predicted for something like 50 years. People were saying the radio was going to die back in the 50s when television came along. And radio, you know, it has 1,000 lives, it keeps surviving. But radio ratings have been going down and down for some time. And radio has gotten even less adventurous than it is. You know, the year before the Morgan Wallen thing, As It Was by Harry Styles stayed at number 1 for 15 weeks, and that was largely because of radio. It wasn't even streaming, really. It was the radio suddenly decided, hey, this Harry Styles song tests well, let's just keep playing that, and they just kept playing it. So the fact that radio is still a factor in the charts, which I'm actually fundamentally a fan of. I want radio, I want that passive fandom to be part of what factors into the charts, but I could see a record like As It Was just kind of catching on at radio and sticking around forever, and if nothing else kind of upsets it, it could hang around forever. One of the things that's most remarkable about Old Town Road, by the way, by current standards, unlike both As It Was by Harry Styles and Last Night by Morgan Wallen, those were 19 weeks consecutively. That's very unusual, because it was outstreaming everything on the charts by a factor of 2 or 3 to 1. So it'll take a fairly unique record to do that again.
Any other questions?
Chris, one thing I was curious about, looking back at it, are there any albums that were purchased a lot, but then it turned out no one ever listened to them?
I mean, I would love to know how many Jethro Tull fans actually played Thick as a Brick, and that was the number 1 album in 1973.
The American Idol album?
The American Idol albums, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, well, as long as we're going to talk about American Idol, those American Idol #1 songs, like nobody
Yeah.
remembers those fondly, including the people who recorded them. Kelly Clarkson, Fantasia Barrino, none of them remember their #1 hit all that fondly. Inside Your Heaven by Carrie Underwood, her only Hot 100 #1, weirdly. So, and yet those went to #1 because people were like, well, I have to have a souvenir of this latest season of American Idol. You know, also, I in a way, in a sort of sideways fashion, I wrote about this when Billboard added streaming data to the album chart, which they finally did at the beginning of 2015. Because now streaming, I mean, it would have been tone deaf and, you know, antediluvian for Billboard not to factor streaming in, because that's the way people listen to albums. And the cynic will say, okay, but if you just listen to the hit from a song, you know, 1,500 times, that counts as an album purchase. You're not really consuming the whole album. To which I say, okay, yeah, but don't you think there were people who bought Between the Lines by Janice Ian in 1975, a #1 album, by the way, and just played at 17 over and over and over again? You know, like, I'm sure those albums existed.
Well, even the height of the sort of alt rock, right after the Hot 100 loosened the rules that
Right.
the physical single didn't have to come out in the 90s. And so you had all of those albums that were sort of like $18.99 maxi singles, you know, where,
Right.
and that was also, I mean, that's always what I cite, and we talked about this, as the beginning of the sort of like flying too close to the sun moment, when they were like, oh, we're gonna sell these albums, let's make the Diamond Award, and we're just gonna honor 10 million sold, and then it was like, oh, nothing has sold 10 million since Usher, you
Right.
know?
The Chumbawamba moment.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you know, Chumbawamba sold 4 million copies of Tub Thumper in America off one hit single, and I would love to know how many people played that album beyond that one song. I mean, I love that song, but let's be real.
Any other questions?
I think Heather.
I was just gonna ask, because I know you had mentioned earlier that the flagship version of this song kind of became the version with Billy Ray Cyrus.
Yes.
Was there any debate that you had about, because like on the cover of this, you have the song by Lil Nas X and Billy Ray Cyrus. Was there any like, I don't know how much thought went into deciding whether this version or the original was gonna be the one that ended up on the cover?
That's a fun question. When Duke is still just getting this series off the ground, Duke University Press, and they put that tag on the very first book, which is Roadrunner by Joshua Clover, a song by Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. And for some reason, they left it off of Eric Weisbart's second book in the series, Hound Dog. I think because the problem with Hound Dog is, do you put Big Mama Thornton or do you put Elvis Presley? Clearly the Elvis version was bigger, but Big Mama Thornton is kind of more legendary. So it's hard to know. I fought to have it on there. I told Duke University Press, look, if you're looking for my input on this, I would like it to be on there, and I would like it to include Billy Ray Cyrus, because I consider that sort of the flagship version, and it's the version that comes up, you know, when you look for the song on streaming services now. It's the version you're going to get first. I think everybody now considers it the flagship version. Although I will tell one quick funny story, which is that on my birthday, my girlfriend took a bunch of us out to karaoke. And and this was about a month and a half before this book came out, and somebody said, Chris, you're doing karaoke, you have to sing Old Town Road. And they put Old Town Road into the queue, and it came up, and for some reason, it was the Lil Nas X version alone. And it was over in 1 minute and 53 seconds, and I was like, oh, I really wanted to do the hat down, cross town, living like a rock star verse. So I guess it's not the flagship everywhere, maybe not in karaoke machines.
Just to follow up on that point, that it's a very short song, how much do you think that its brevity and plus its catchiness turned into more streams?
Yeah, I mean, there was already a trend happening before Lil Nas X showed up that records have been getting shorter. And that, again, to really echo Maura's point, again, it's the technology stupid. It's like, basically, if you put out an album with lots of short songs, you get paid for each song. You don't get paid for each minute. And so, you know, if people are clicking again and again and again on your song, that's more royalties for you. So the days of, you know, Stairway to Heaven or Guns N' Roses' November Rain are giving way to the era of, you know, shorter songs and songs where the hook is right up front. So streaming has absolutely changed, you know, the structure of songs. There's data on this, that in the last 10 years, songs have gotten shorter. And that was happening even before Lil Nas X. But the fact that this record was under 2 minutes well, one of the fun chart statistics that went around Chart Nerd Land when it first went to number one. And again, in that first week, it was the Lil Nas X version, so the original version. They were saying it was the shortest number one song since a bunch of records from the 60s, like Stay by Morris Williams and the Zodiacs, which I think is only like 1:38 or something like that. Or The Stripper by David Rose, which is like ridiculous bawdy instrumental from 1962, which was only like 1:40 or something like that. That was the last era where songs could be under 2 minutes and be hits. And we're kind of looping back around to that now, which is fun to think about.
Any more questions? Last chance. Well, this was such a delight. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.